We just had a wonderful 5-ish minute break, and I can only wonder how many of you during those 5 minutes spent that time rehashing the stories that we just heard, and how many new versions were just born in the last 5 minutes. Because if people love to do anything, they love to talk, and they most especially love to talk about people who are famous, about people who get up to silly and serious and mischievous and great heroic deeds. So we've heard about the Narts, and some of their great heroic deeds, adventures upon which they have embarked and returned with varying degrees of success. We have heard about their chief, the great Nart Orzameg, and we have had only brief reference to Lady Satanaya, wife of the great Nart Orzameg, wife of the chief of all of the Narts. Satanaya was smart and clever and compassionate. And when she met the great Nart Orzameg, he was significantly older than she was. But they sat and they talked and they recognized in each other an adventurous spirit, a mutual compassion, a sense of justice. And even in his years, the great Nart Orzameg still cut a fine figure. His mustache was in supreme condition. And Lady Satanaya was beautiful. Her hair flowed and cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face with the smoothest skin, eyes that sparkled and danced with laughter, and could just as quickly be clouded over in deep concentration. Lady Satanaya would frequently spend her nights with her husband, the great Nart Orzameg. And frequently not. Sometimes she would spend them alone, and sometimes she would not. And if any one of the heroes and the warriors wondered if maybe they would have an opportunity to spend the night with her, all they had to do was walk by her room. And if she had already bestowed that honor on someone else, well, that warrior's spear would be planted in the ground right in front of the doorway to her room. Well, the Narts are a great community, full of warriors and heroes, but there are more than warriors and heroes. They also have tricksters. And there was also a sheep herder, multiple sheep herders. The Narts were vast. They ate a lot. They needed clothes. There was a sheep herder in particular who had deep admiration for Lady Satanaya. Now, a woman as great and compassionate and beautiful as Lady Satanaya, well, people will talk about her, and they will spread stories, and the stories don't always line up. And so it depends on who you ask. It depends on what you believe. Maybe it depends on your own personal history, what seems most likely to you. Well, one day, Lady Satanaya was out in the woods. She wandered to the river. She had this favorite spot. It was a vast, wide river. The waves tumbled and crashed into each other as the stream went flowing by, but she had a special spot where an eddy pooled, and there was even a bank there. The trees broke open just a little bit to let through a dappled sunshine, and so the waters in this eddy against this vast river, the waters there, by the time The afternoon had set in, the waters were warm. So Lady Sataniah would go there to wash her clothes, to wash her hair, to wash her body. And it depends on who you ask, which of those things she was washing that particular day when the shepherd saw her from across the other side of the river. It depends on who you ask. Perhaps he was just out with his sheep, looking for more verdant pastures. Perhaps he knew that this was where she liked to go. But in any case, there she was, and there he was on the other side. And he saw her with her clothes, washing them in the water, and the droplets were flying through the air. And he just stood frozen in place as this beauteous woman was sending droplets of water through the air, and he could feel his face getting flushed. He could feel his heartbeat quickening. He could feel himself come alive in ways that he only dreamed. And before he knew it, he was no longer in the pastures. He was on the bank of the river. And when he realized what had happened, some say, he had loosed the arrow of his manhood. And when he realized what had happened, he called out, "Lady Sataniah, it's coming for you." And sure enough, drifting and darting between the waves of this vast river, Lady Sataniah saw it. And it depends on who you ask. Did it hit her? Did she step aside and instead it hit a stone? Did she look up and see this shepherd who was young and handsome to behold? And did she return his passion? Or did he take her against her will? It depends on who you ask. Depends on where you come from. Some say that she was there in the rivers and she was bathing. She was washing her whole body. And the shepherd was just happening by the bank when she emerged, droplets of water just falling from her body, and with the sun shining high up above and her glistening skin, the shepherd saw her emerge with her hair just draped over her shoulders, and the way the water glinted off her skin, it was as if her breasts were glowing. And he started swimming. And as he was swimming, he felt himself suddenly overcome by a great weakness. And Lady Sataniah saw all of this because, as I said before, she was wise and she was observant. For example, the Narts had a great golden tree that produced apples, ordinary apples, crunchy, sweet, ordinary apples. But at the top of this tree was a very special apple. Once it appeared, rather than ripening in the due course of a season, it would take an entire 6 months. And over the course of the 6 months, it would grow from its normal apple shape, larger and larger and larger and larger. And at the end of those 6 months, it would start to shrink smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it was a normal apple again. And then it would again begin to grow larger and larger and larger. And Lady Sataniah noticed this. She watched the cycles of this apple every 6 months with great interest. And one day, she climbed the tree and she picked the apple. To her great relief, another one took its place. And so she took this apple right as it was at the peak of its 6 months of growing. She took this large apple down and she brought it home and she cut into it. The sweet aromas that emerged as she crunched through the skin were almost intoxicating to inhale. She took a small piece and she tasted it. She tasted a small bit of the skin. She carefully carved out the seeds and she portioned them out. She cut the apple and separated it into different portions, and for each one she had a plan. For each one she was curious. Sometimes she ate it. Sometimes she spread it on her skin. Sometimes she cut her own skin and then spread a paste on it. She was meticulous. And she uncovered all of the secrets of this apple. And with her knowledge, she cared for the Narts. She tended their wounds. She cured their illnesses. She tended to their sadnesses, to their madnesses. One day, a young Nart warrior came, covered in wounds. She took one look at him, and she turned him away. She knew that it would come with a great cost. But when she looked at this young warrior, she did not see this young warrior. She saw Old Man Cholera. His disguise was nothing to her. She saw right through it. Old Man Cholera had been getting older and weaker and older and weaker, and the Narts had been getting stronger and retaining their youth. So he came to her as a wounded Nart warrior so that he could have a bit of this apple, returned his strength, spread his disease everywhere. And Lady Satanaya took one look at him and she turned him away, and she knew it would come at a great cost, but she knew that it was less than the alternative. For later, under the cover of darkness, Old Man Cholera returned, and he chopped down the tree entirely. And so he was not strong. He continued to age. He continued to be weak. But from that point on, so did the Narts. They had to feel the pain of their wounds, the fatigue of getting older. And when Lady Satanaya sent him away, she knew it would be a great price. But she knew it was better than the alternative. And so here she is, bathing in the river, and she sees this shepherd swimming towards her, suddenly overcome by a great weakness. And she sees the cause, and she knows the cause. And as his manly arrow is making its way towards her, she summons the waters up around her in protection, and she wraps herself in their folds. And sure enough, it hits a stone. She lets the waters fall back around, and she picks up that stone. She gathers it in her arms, and she brings it back home. And now, this stone is the center of her attention. And time passes. And then she takes the stone to Tpch, the great blacksmith. The blacksmith of the gods, the god of the forge. She takes this stone to him. She sits down on his earthen ground, cradles it in her lap, on the ground, in her dress with her legs wrapped around it, and she looks up at Tpch and she says, "Take your hammer, break open this rock." And Tpch looks at her, and he looks at the rock. He picks up his hammer. The rock cracks open, and there inside is a baby boy, burning red hot, burns through the rest of the stone, burns through Lady Satanaya's gown. But Tpch is god of the forge for a reason. He very quickly reaches for the tongs, picks the baby up by his thighs, and plunges him 7 times into ice-cold water. And just like with metal, as he plunges this baby into the ice-cold water, the baby's skin cools and hardens until it is brittle. And then he takes the baby and he plunges him in the water 7 more times. And this makes his skin hard and pliable and durable. Except for that little spot where the tongs gripped his thigh. That spot stayed just normal and fleshy like you would expect from any other human. And this was how the great Nart hero, Sosriqwe, was born and forged. Or so some say. There are other versions. He was born a normal baby. Lady Satanaya brought him food and drink and milk and meat, and the baby consumed it all and was still hungry and wailed, "What is this you are bringing me?" And she said, "What would you have me bring you?" And he told her how he needed to be forged in hot fire and tempered in the milk from 100 she-wolves. But that is another story for another time. And so, you have heard some possible stories. And there are more possible stories coming. But I invite you to take just a moment to think of some new possible stories.